letting me know, so I have to figure that out. But anyway, okay, so I was talking about 10 out of 10 albums, Metallica, Master of Puppets, Opeth, Blackwater Park. You know, I haven't checked those out. But, you know, there's even other albums like Pink Floyd, The Dark Side of the Moon, Beatles, Abbey Road. Even Kanye West, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. Like, there's a lot of albums that critics like, but these are my personal picks. So, let's move on to my number one, which will be... Refused, The Shape of Punk to Come. Refused came out with an album. They're a band from Sweden. They came out with an album called The Shape of Punk to Come back in 1998. This album was such a huge change to anything that was done in the scene back then. They were a hardcore punk band, but then they made this crazy 12-track album that really shaped, honestly, the music that we listen to. This is like the pinnacle of music, and I will die on that hill, man. But this is the song New Noise. They even have mixed in variety like this. Tannhauser Deriv is the song title. So this song is 8 minutes long, and it starts off with violin and ends with accordion. Especially in the punk world, there was nothing like this. That's why it was such a huge change. It's still such a weird album to listen to because of all the different sounds that they pull in. So Refuse actually laid the footwork to a lot of the bands that we listen to today that a lot of people don't realize. So if you're into more like death metal-y stuff, this probably won't be your taste. But this album, I think, is worth checking out for anybody because of just like how influential this record is. Number 2 album is one of my favorite bands of all time. And this band is a band that I've always like seemed to like. They were a post-hardcore, almost metalcore band. And then they went into Radiohead sounding experimental rock. It was such a huge change. It took some time to really adjust, but it ended up being like a 10 out of 10 album. So the band I'm talking about is Thrice. Thrice sounded like this. See, they got that like post-hardcore emo kind of vibe, and especially with this album. This album actually got them really popular. It was all over MTV and stuff. This was a massive album. But the one album that really changed everything for them was V-Suit. This is a 10 out of 10 album. It was nothing I've ever heard before. They really went fully experimental. They tried working with a new producer that was like working with pop artists. We dream of ways to break these iron bars. We dream of turtles and of sleeping gods. This record too, they started experimenting with like different kind of tunings. So they went into, I believe this song is in drop G, because they also have a little bit more softer tracks like this. And actually Architects did an amazing cover of this song for their Daybreaker Deluxe record. Architects, for example, wouldn't sound the way that they do if it wasn't for this band. My other 10 out of 10 album is a band that is from Italy, and they've only made one record. And the one record is a mix of prog, metalcore, and post-hardcore. Essentially, it's Misery Signals on steroids. And that band is a Mia Venera Landscape with their record, The Long Procession. The drummer in this band is absolutely nuts. Another example, I've talked about this song. I made a reaction video for it, even though I've already heard this song. People that know bands like Sigur Rós too, Icelandic like post-rock band, they take elements of post-rock as well and bring it into their style of metalcore and prog. Honestly, I think some of the best bands are ones that push boundaries of genres, that mix in a whole bunch of different genres, and also do something a little bit different from anybody else. more albums that I truly consider 10 out of 10. Back in 2007, holy shit, they totally changed prog metal and also metalcore at the same time because it's a perfect blend of both. This was like before Periphery and stuff, really showing mostly like core kids what prog metal can be. And that band is Between the Buried and Me with Colors. Yeah, progressive metal band, and this record flows as one giant song. And it's 64 minutes long. So it has breakdowns, solos, blast beats, and everything. Also, it ends with one of my favorite guitar solos of all time. The next album that I would say is a 10 out of 10 is also important for context because all these albums did something different for what it was doing at the time of year that it was released, right? So back in 2006, this band went into a whole different direction with their sound. They first were a really emo band and they were massive. They were on TV shows like the OC, if anyone remembers that show. They were massively influential. But then what they did is the record afterwards, they went really heavy and dark. And it was such a drastic change that they lost a lot of fans, but they also gained a lot of new fans along the way, including me. It mixes in post-hardcore again, some metalcore, and also prog. It's like all these genres combined that seems to really, I kind of like favor, but at the same time, it's the blend of all the genres that really, like, to me, pushes boundaries. So that band that I'm talking about is Under Oath with Define the Great Line. The album starts with one of my favorite riffs. This album is fucking nuts, man. It still sounds good, too. That's another thing. The album came out in 2006, and the tone and everything just sounds so good. Other bands at the time, there was like Bless the Fall, and oh man, I'm trying to think, maybe Escape the Fate. And they all had that crunchy, MySpace kind of tone. But Under Oath had such a different kind of sound, and still, it's not replicated. It has such a distinct sound that makes it like stand the test of time, in my opinion. When they know how to be heavy, they know how to be fucking heavy. And the first 2 minutes of this song is like one of my favorite pieces of music. And one of my favorite things about Under Oath is Spencer Chamberlain, the screamer. I love the enunciation. You can hear almost every word he's saying. And the riffs. I love the riffs. So Under Oath is one of the most influential bands of the scene too. They're influenced by Refuse actually, so that's like the grandfather of all this. My last 10 out of 10 album is actually a recent one. Now, I don't have to explain it as much as the other records because a lot of you guys will agree with this. Some might not. Not a lot of people actually love Loathe. And it's funny because all the other records that I was talking about were from 2010 and before. And this album came out in 2020. So for 10 years, I really think metalcore wasn't that interesting. I do think the early 2000s was like the pinnacle of the scene that we listened to. But then in the past 3 years, I would argue that there is big changes to the scene. Bands are getting heavier. Bands are getting more experimental. And Loathe is at the forefront for me, man. This record is so genre pushing. And it's such a flow and it's so distinct in tone. Every song has its own identity. There's so many good things to like about this record. So some people might not like it because Deftones and that sound of shoegaze is not everyone's style. But you can't argue that the songwriting is not top notch. It's phenomenal songwriting, especially for a new band. Like this is like only their second record. Some of the non-singles are actually my favorite, like even the ending song. But yeah, Those are really the only 6 albums that I would give 10 out of 10s to. I don't find a lot of albums to be 10s. Like I find them mostly like 8s, sometimes 9s. But I think Loathe is super deserving. Already, this band is already changing up the scene because you hear so many new bands incorporating shoegaze into their core music. Like Thornhill, for example, right? Has little bonuses. These aren't 10 out of 10s. I just friggin' love these records, but... Fortress is just a wicked time. I love this record, but honestly, Kazaya is my personal favorite. But I don't think this album's a 10 out of 10. It's just one of my favorite albums of all time and really shaped the music that I listen to. And they wrote this album when they were 17 years old, which is also mind-blowing. Actually, Protest is heavily influenced by Thrice and BT Bam. Thrice is heavily influenced by Refused. So that's what I mean. Refused is like the grandfather of this scene. Also, another band that is worth mentioning to me is Sixth. The Trees Are All Dead and Dried Out is an album that is top-notch. When people wonder why I'm so picky with modern progressive metalcore, it's bands like this. This was 2003. But yeah, those are the 10 out of 10 albums. Guys, enough about me. I'm curious to know what your 10 out of 10s are. Some of you guys have let me know. I'm curious to know what chat's taste is, because music is the most subjective thing in the world. That's why I do this full time, because nothing's factual. I can just talk a whole bunch of bullshit.